Each year, individuals reach the final stage of their legal journey after years of trials, appeals, and delays. But how did they end up here? And why have some spent decades awaiting their final moment? In this video, you'll see the most dangerous individuals set to face the ultimate punishment in 2025. This is Wendell Grissom. In 2005, he played a key role in a brutal home invasion that started as a reckless plan fueled by whiskey and desperation. Grissom, driving through the night with a homeless hitchhiker named Jesse Johns, had one goal: do whatever it took to make quick money. Their journey led them to Oklahoma City, where they spent the night in a hotel before setting out again the next day, searching for their next move. In Blaine County, they drove aimlessly until they picked a home at random. Inside the home was Drew Kopp, her 2 young daughters, and her best friend, Amber Matthews. When Grissom forced his way in with a gun, Kopp pleaded for mercy. "Take what you want and leave," she begged. But instead of backing down, he simply laughed. Then, in an instant, he raised his gun and fired. The bullet struck Kopp in the head, fracturing her skull. Another shot hit her in the hip. Desperate to protect the children, Matthews ran to a bedroom, clutching the baby in her arms. But Grissom followed. Despite her desperate pleas, he shot her in the back of the head while she still held the child. As she collapsed, he fired one more time, this time directly into her forehead. Meanwhile, Johns finally entered the house. Witnessing the chaos Grissom had unleashed, Kopp, barely clinging to life, seized her chance. She managed to escape, stealing the shooter's own truck to get away. For years, Grissom's legal team insisted that brain damage had affected his decision-making. They pointed to past head injuries, with a forensic psychiatrist testifying that the damage was permanent. But prosecutors weren't convinced. They argued there was no solid medical proof, just another attempt to shift blame. Then came his clemency hearing. While others pleaded for their lives in similar situations, Grissom said nothing. No apology, no request for mercy. His lawyers claimed he was in too much physical pain to speak, but prosecutors weren't buying it. Wendell Grissom is scheduled to face the ultimate punishment on March 20th, 2025. But the next case? It's even more unsettling. This brings us to Edward Thomas James. His troubled past began in childhood, where he was exposed to substance use at an early age. He later joined the U.S. Army but was discharged for repeatedly breaking the rules. After returning home, his behavior spiraled, leading to multiple run-ins with the law. Then, in 1993, Edward Thomas James became the center of a string of events that shook the Castleberry, Florida community. At that time, James was renting a room in the home of Betty Dick, a 58-year-old grandmother. On September 19, 1993, Edward Thomas James returned home from a party to find her 4 grandchildren sleeping in the living room. Among them, 8-year-old Toni Marie Neuner. James grabbed Toni and overpowered her, leaving her unable to fight back. Thinking she was no longer responsive, he took her to his bedroom and hid her between the bed and the wall. Sadly, she never woke up. After this, James went into Dick's bedroom and hurt her using a candlestick and a sharp object. The noise woke 9-year-old Wendy, Neuner's sister, who saw part of what was happening. James held Wendy back and put her in the bathroom, telling her he wouldn't do anything else to her. He then took some jewelry and drove away in Dick's car. It didn't take long for authorities to identify him as a suspect, but before they could make an arrest, he vanished, fleeing the state. Desperate to track him down, investigators turned to a well-known television program to spread the word. And it worked. Tips poured in, leading authorities straight to California, where he was finally captured. Once in custody, he admitted to everything. His trial ended with the words "possible sentence," the judge making it clear just how deeply his actions had affected the victims and their families. But he wasn't ready to give up. Over the years, he filed appeal after appeal, trying to change his fate. Each one was denied. And now, after more than 30 years behind bars, the final decision has been made. His sentence is set to be carried out on March 20th, 2025. Meet Jesse Dean Hoffman, Jr. He has been on Louisiana's most notorious list since 1998. His case traces back to a chilling night in 1996 when he was just 18. In downtown New Orleans, a woman was taken against her will and forced to withdraw money from an ATM. But it didn't end there. She was driven to a remote location where the situation turned even more horrific, and she never made it out alive. Hoffman was quickly identified after law enforcement linked ATM receipts to the scene. Surveillance footage showed him with the woman at the machine. Investigators also received reports from witnesses who found personal belongings that further tied him to the case. Do you think he thought he would get away with it? During his trial, even claiming at one point that someone else was responsible. However, the jury was convinced otherwise. His defense tried to argue that his difficult childhood affected his actions, but this did not sway the court. After being found guilty, he was given the most severe punishment Louisiana allows. Hoffman has tried multiple times to appeal his sentence, arguing about jury selection, his age at the time, and other legal technicalities. Each attempt has been rejected, including a final decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. Louisiana has not carried out a sentence like this in over 15 years, but the state now has plans to move forward. On March 18, 2025, he will take his last breath. This case has left us many questions. But what if the next one could have been stopped before it even began? This is David Leonard Wood, also known as the Desert Killer. He was found guilty for taking the lives of at least 6 young women in El Paso, Texas, between May and August 1987. Wood's troubled past started early. He struggled in school, dealt with a chaotic home life, and showed signs of aggression. His first recorded offense happened in 1976, leading to his imprisonment. Over the years, he continued to harm others, repeatedly being sent behind bars, only to be released and cause more harm. In 1987, a series of disappearances shook El Paso. Young women vanished without a trace until authorities discovered their remains buried in the desert. The evidence? It all pointed to Wood, who had a concerning history of mistreating women. Witnesses saw him near the victims, and forensic evidence linked him to the cases. After his arrest in October 1987, he went through a long and intense trial, ultimately leading to a conviction. For decades, he's been held in a tightly secured unit in Texas, relentlessly fighting his sentence with appeal after appeal, each one denied. But now, after years of legal battles, the clock is finally running out. He is set for his final punishment on March 13, 2025. Do you think the long wait for justice is fair to the victims' families? This is Moises Sandoval Mendoza, a man who has been on Texas's highest security level for nearly 2 decades. His case dates back to 2004 when a young mother, Rochelle O'Neill Tollison, went missing. Her disappearance led to an intense investigation, eventually pointing to Mendoza. But what exactly happened that night? Rachel was last seen at a house party, where she and Mendoza crossed paths for just a brief moment. Days later, her home was found in chaos. Furniture overturned, belongings scattered, and worst of all, her infant daughter left completely alone. The scene sent shockwaves through investigators, and it didn't take long for them to zero in on a suspect, Mendoza. When they brought him in for questioning, the truth unraveled. He admitted to harming Tollison, then attempting to cover his tracks, moving her remains and setting fire to the site in a desperate attempt to erase what he had done. But justice came swiftly. Mendoza was found guilty and handed the harshest sentence possible. His legal team fought back, claiming errors in the trial had violated his rights. They filed appeal after appeal, But the answer was always the same: denied. Both state and federal courts rejected his final pleas, leaving him with no way out. Now, after spending nearly 19 years in confinement, Mendoza's scheduled punishment is approaching on April 23, 2025. But the question remains, will any last-minute legal action change his fate? Or is this truly the end of his long legal battle? Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, because the most chilling stories are yet to come. This is Donald Ray Middlebrooks, tied to a deeply disturbing case from 1987. It all started with a simple accident at a flea market in East Nashville, one that spiraled into something far more sinister. After a vase was broken, tensions escalated. 14-year-old Carrick Majors and his friends were chased down, setting off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Middlebrooks and his associates took Majors to a secluded location, where he endured hours of unimaginable suffering before losing his life. His body was discovered the next day. Middlebrooks was convicted and sentenced to face the consequences of his actions. However, this case stands out not only because of the horrific nature of the events, but also because of its racial implications. Interestingly, Middlebrooks, who was white, became one of the rare cases in modern Tennessee history where a white individual received such a sentence for their role in an incident involving a black victim. Middlebrooks' sentence date is set for March 2025. The trial and its aftermath highlighted serious concerns about law enforcement's response and raised questions about racial biases in the system. But this wasn't the only case where race may have played a troubling role. This is Timothy Coleman, a man at the center of a controversial case dating back to 1996, one that ended with the loss of Melinda Stevens, a confidential informant working with the Springfield police. Stevens had been gathering evidence and was preparing to testify against Coleman in a case related to illegal substance activity, but before she could take the stand, she was silenced. After his arrest, Coleman was held in jail, where fellow inmates later claimed he admitted to doing it. But was that the full story? His legal team argues that the case against him was deeply influenced by racial bias. As a black man caught in the height of the 1990s war on illegal substances, they believe he never stood a chance. Adding to the controversy, another man, a white individual, has since come forward, claiming responsibility. Yet, for reasons unknown, that confession has never been fully investigated. October 30th, 2025, he will face the harshest punishment. This is Aaron Gunches. He has been in legal trouble for over 2 decades. His most serious offense happened in 2002, when a confrontation escalated, leading to the tragic loss of Ted Price. The situation started when Gunches went to visit his girlfriend and found out that Price, her former partner, had been in an argument with her earlier that day. Price was in a weakened state when Gunches and others placed him in a vehicle, supposedly to take him to a bus station. Instead, Gunches drove to a remote area where his actions led to Price never making it out alive. A few months later, in early 2003, Gunches was pulled over during a routine traffic stop. Instead of cooperating, he lashed out, injuring the officer before making a daring escape. His actions triggered a massive manhunt involving multiple law enforcement agencies. Eventually, he was discovered hiding in a haystack and taken into custody. Gunches pleaded guilty in 2004 and was sentenced to the most severe punishment in 2008. But what made his case truly stand out were his own demands, urging the courts to carry out his sentence. Yet, legal obstacles kept pushing the date further and further. After years of delays and court battles, a final date is now set, March 19, 2025. This is Matthew Lee Johnson, who took the life of a 76-year-old woman, Nancy Harris. In May 2012, a tragic event occurred at a Garland, Texas convenience store involving Matthew Lee Johnson and 76-year-old clerk Nancy Harris. Johnson entered the store early in the morning and, after taking money from the cash register, inflicted severe harm on Harris by dousing her with a flammable liquid and setting her on fire. Despite her critical injuries, Harris managed to provide a description of her assailant before being transported to a local hospital. She succumbed to her injuries nearly a week later. Throughout his trial, the prosecution portrayed Johnson as having a dangerous past, arguing that his actions were part of a larger pattern of disturbing behavior. On the other hand, his defense team argued that Johnson's past struggles with substance abuse and mental health issues played a role in his actions. After years of legal appeals, including one to the U.S. Supreme Court, his case was not overturned. He will face the ultimate punishment on May 20, 2025. Johnson's case has raised questions about the justice system's handling of individuals with deep-rooted struggles. What do you think? Should personal history be weighed more heavily in cases like this? This is Oscar Franklin Smith, a man who committed a horrific act. In 1989, 3 lives were lost in a case that pointed to one man. Smith's estranged wife, Judy, and her 2 sons, Chad and Jason, were found in a horrific scene that left investigators searching for answers. But as they dug deeper, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Smith had a history of conflict with his family, and multiple witnesses recalled him making chilling threats in the past. Suspicion only grew when authorities discovered he had taken out insurance policies on the victims, not long before the incident. At trial, the evidence stacked up against him. A crucial piece? A palm print, his, left on a sheet near one of the victims. His defense fought back, challenging the findings, but the jury wasn't convinced. The verdict was clear: guilty. Smith was sentenced to the harshest penalty possible. But even decades later, his case remains a topic of debate. Efforts to reopen it have surfaced, fueled by newly uncovered evidence, including DNA findings connected to the weapon used. The analysis detected DNA from an unidentified individual on an awl, a tool recovered at the scene. This discovery led Smith's attorneys to file a motion to reopen the case, arguing that the presence of unknown DNA on the weapon could suggest involvement of another person. However, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals denied this motion. He is set to face the punishment on May 22, 2025. After seeing how past actions lead to tough choices, think about a scenario where every decision seems loaded with regret. The next case will leave you horrified. This is Byron Black, whose story is filled with conflict, jealousy, and legal battles that continue to this day. In the late 1980s, he was in a relationship with Angela Clay, a mother of 2 young daughters, LaToya and Lakeisha. But tensions in their relationship grew, especially when it came to Angela's estranged husband. As jealousy and frustration built up, their arguments became more intense, leading to a tragic outcome. In 1988, while on work release for a prior incident involving Angela's ex, Black's emotions took over, resulting in a heartbreaking event inside their Nashville home. Investigators quickly focused on Black, uncovering evidence that linked him to what had happened. He was soon convicted and sentenced to the most severe penalties allowed by law. For decades, his case has sparked legal debate, particularly over the question of his intellectual abilities. In 2004, Black argued that he had a condition that should change his sentence, but courts rejected his claim. However, in 2021, Tennessee introduced a new law that prevents certain sentences for individuals with intellectual disabilities, even for past cases under specific conditions. With this law in place, Black now has another opportunity to appeal. Currently, he is scheduled to face the ultimate punishment on August 5, 2025. This is Kareem Jackson, whose story involves a tragic chain of events that led to his conviction. In 1997, Jackson, along with 3 accomplices, was involved in a theft in Columbus, Ohio. What began as an attempt to steal from an apartment escalated to confrontation. The incident led to the tragic loss of 2 individuals' lives. Antonio Hunter and Terrence Walker. But what drove Jackson to act in this manner? Jackson grew up in a turbulent environment, with his father leaving before he started kindergarten. Despite his early struggles, he was active in church, but by the time he was 16, he drifted away from that path. He was an average student, dropping out of school in the 12th grade and worked hard to provide for his family, eventually earning his GED. Over the years, he became a father of 3 children. On the night of March 25, 1997, Jackson, with the help of his associates, set out to rob an apartment. Initially, things went smoothly, but it soon turned unimaginable. Jackson and his partners confronted the residents, who were Antonio and Terrence, and their friends during the theft. Despite assurances from the victims that they had no money or illegal substances, the situation took a dark turn. Jackson later claimed that the victims knew him by name, and that led to him deciding to take extreme actions to ensure there would be no witnesses. Why did Jackson feel the need to go this far, even when the victims begged for their lives? Could a different decision have prevented the tragic outcome? These are questions that will likely continue to haunt the families involved. Jackson's arrest came shortly after the authorities were able to use information from one of his accomplices, leading to a photo lineup that identified Jackson as one of the perpetrators. He was convicted and sentenced to capital punishment, a sentence that has been delayed multiple times over the years due to ongoing legal challenges. As of now, Jackson's date for capital punishment is set for December 10, 2025, after a series of delays. Please keep in mind the families affected by these events and pray for healing and peace. When a case drags on for decades, leaving families desperate for answers, what happens when the past finally catches up? The next story takes you to that exact moment. This is Harold Wayne Nichols. His case has been in the legal system for decades, with multiple delays and appeals. He was originally given the most severe penalty in 1988 after being found responsible for the tragic loss of 21-year-old Karen Pulley. However, his actions extended beyond that, as he later admitted to multiple similar incidents in Chattanooga, targeting individuals during the night. Nichols admitted to these acts, but there isn't much information available about why he did them. Records show that he had a difficult childhood, experiencing both abuse and poverty, which might have played a role in shaping his actions. After his arrest, Nichols faced a long and intense trial. Every detail of his past was brought to light. In a last attempt to change his fate, he cooperated with authorities, revealing more horrible acts he had committed. But it wasn't enough. The court stood by its decision, recognizing the lasting harm he had caused. Then came the delays. In 2020, as the world dealt with a global crisis, Nichols used the situation to request more time, claiming it interfered with legal proceedings. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee approved the request, putting everything on hold. In 2022, another scheduled date was suddenly stopped, forcing the governor to reconsider how the state handles cases like his. For years, Karen Pulley's family has waited for justice, only to see it pushed further away each time. Now, with the Tennessee Supreme Court setting a final date for December 11, 2025, one question remains. Will this truly be the end, or is another delay still ahead?